One way you can gauge the quality of a stream is in a stony, cool, fast-flowing stream like this one. You can collect an invertebrate sample by kicking amongst the stones with a net, collecting your invertebrate sample and seeing what you collect. And using an MCI index, you can gauge the quality of the water based by the sample that you collect. So the way you do it is kicking around in a stone, and then downstream from where you kick, you collect your sample, transfer it to your container, and then bring it back so under a microscope you can see what types of invertebrates there are and the indication of the quality of the water based on the invertebrates you collect. And the idea is that if you're getting sensitive species in your sample that can only tolerate very good water quality, that's indicating that the health of the water is good and that there's not a great number of nutrients and other farming contaminants getting into the waterway, making that water toxic for living things and killing off the more sensitive organisms. So we'll have a go here at this site and we'll see what kind of organisms we collect and how that indicates the quality of the water that we have here. So the first step is just to put the net downstream of where you're going to kick, and then just kicking amongst the stones. The invertebrates that you've dislodged will be moving downstream with the water. And you just put a little bit of water in your container, put your sample in there. And you might, there wasn't too many in that one, so you might need to do a few different samples to get a good range of invertebrates. Some of the indicators of a habitat that's going to provide a healthy stream environment is having a good cover of trees, which is the riparian cover close to the stream. The type of farming that is involved in the catchment, so if your catchment has a lot of intensive agriculture in it, or there's an urban section in it, the nutrients that are put into those systems will flow in, will dissolve into the water and flow with the water down the catchment and be collected in the streams, and that leads to a peak in nutrients in those systems called eutrophication, which leads to an excess in algae growth. It will poison the more sensitive species in the stream, so some of the macroinvertebrates like the stonefly and some mayfly won't be able to exist in that system because they're too sensitive to the contaminants that are in it. And also you can do a sample of the fish species in it, and some of the more sensitive species like the kokopu and the koaro and the native crayfish, and some of the other galaxiid species, if you don't collect them in your sample, would indicate that there's a contamination of that waterway that's leading to them not being there. And it depends on what would naturally occur in that site. For example, this site here is quite far inland, so you'd expect to get species like banded kokopu in it if it wasn't contaminated, and you'd also expect in a stony bottom stream like this to collect stonefly and some of the more sensitive mayfly species if it wasn't being contaminated. So if you're not collecting those species in your sample, you know that there's an excess of nutrients running down into that catchment, and your agricultural system is out of balance, and there's an excess of nutrients being produced that are not being absorbed into the systems and being transferred into productivity, but instead are moving with the water down into the streams and rivers and contaminating the habitat there, and impacting the ecology of those systems and what fish and invertebrate species can survive in those habitats. So some of the measures that you can do to prevent that happening is not applying, minimalising the amounts of artificial fertilisers that you apply to that system, making sure there's good grass growth and integration of tree crops into your system, because the longer grass growth will lead to a bigger root system, and that root system has more opportunity to absorb the nutrients out of the system and convert it to the growth of plant matter in the grasses. And in a similar way, the trees that you incorporate into your system will have a much bigger root system and a much bigger opportunity to absorb those nutrients out of your system and prevent them getting into the streams and waterways. The other thing is the compaction of the soil. So if you do holistic grazing type management, where you move your herds around your landscape in fast duration grazing system, so they're not at a particular site for very long, they don't have much opportunity to compact that soil, and it's the compaction of soil that prevents the water from being absorbed down into the soil. And if it doesn't do that, it will instead run along the surface of the soil, which will lead to more erosion, but it will also lead to more of the nutrients that are in the water, in the surface soil water, leading down into the waterway instead of being absorbed down into the soil and being utilized by the biology that's in the soil and the root system of the plants, and being converted into biological systems, instead of just being dissolved into that water and contaminating the waterways that are associated with that catchment. So it's the diversity of your farming system, it's the integration of tree crops, it's the longer grass. Riparian cover helps. So if you have a good buffer zone of riparian cover, which is trees and shrubs of any sort alongside the sides of your streams and rivers, that will give another opportunity for those nutrients to get absorbed out of the soil and surface water before it gets into your waterway. But what you've got to keep in mind is that the riparian zone is only a thin strip of the bigger catchment. So if you only plant alongside the riparian zone and the rest of the catchment is left bare, then for all of that rest of the catchment, the water's running off quickly through that system straight down into the water, and the riparian buffer doesn't make a very great impact as far as taking the nutrients out of it. So you've got to really manage the whole system in a holistic way, and have good grass length growth and integration of tree crops, and then you're not getting this excess of nutrients hitting your waterway, and what excess nutrients there may be, the riparian cover can then absorb out, as long as they're not in excess levels.